Welcome back, everyone. And I hope that you enjoyed that networking and sponsor booth break. My name is Kiguta. I'm a journalist and the founder of a women run media business from Nairobi, Kenya. And it's a pleasure to be moderating this session for you this Friday. Well, in the next hour, we will discuss the media taking the lead. We are examining the role of the media in driving a positive societal change by tackling gender stereotypes. I'm pleased to welcome back the day chair, Mallika Kapur, who will be joining us in this session as a panelist. Mallika, as you may know by now, is the deputy global editor for Bloomberg Live, where she's responsible for the editorial content of its marquee summits, including Invest, Bloomberg Equality, and Sooner Than You Think. She's also the host of Bloomberg's popular Out of Office podcast. Welcome back, Mallika, to you.
Thank
Also
you.
joining us today is Michele or Mitch Oliver from Mars Incorporated. She is the Global Corporate Brand and Purpose Director, as well as the Deputy Vice Chair for the Unstereotype Alliance. She is on the board of the Marketing Society and is also a trustee of Stonewall, which is the UK's largest LGBT NGO. And welcome to you, Mitch. And finally, we're also very pleased to be joined by Japleen Pasricha, who is the founder and CEO of Feminism in India, which is an award-winning digital, intersectional, feminist, and bilingual media platform. She's also a TEDx speaker and was recognized as a young innovator in 2018 by the World Summit Awards. She was also featured by the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in a book on women in tech for her work and facilitated by Manika Gandhi and the Ministry of Women and Child Development as, get this, Web Wonder Woman. What a fantastic title and a fantastic panel to join us today. A very warm welcome to you all. Now, as an opener, I'd like to set the scene for our discussion by inviting each one of you to summarize for us, if you would, your perspective on how the media affects gender stereotypes in society and the impact this is having on gender equality and specifically on women entrepreneurship. Anyone can chime in.
I'll kick off. I think, it's something we touched upon on the last panel as well. You really have to see it to be it, right? That's something which comes up a lot. And I see both Japleen and Mitch nodding away right away. And I think as people in the media, it's on us. It's our responsibility to make sure that women are seen and that they are not seen with any of the usual stereotypical trappings associated with them. So really, we have to play a really important role in making sure we see them in the way they deserve to be seen. And we owe it to the next generation. The more women we see, we have to make them visible. And that's what's going to inspire others to hopefully follow in their footsteps. So it's on us.
Right.
Yeah.
Mitch?
Yeah, I mean, to build on that, so the part of the media that I know the most about that I work in is the advertising industry. 700 billion US dollars are spent. 700 billion US dollars are spent every year in the advertising industry. And unfortunately, the stereotypes are pretty woeful. Men outnumber women in ads 2-to-1. They get twice as much screen time. They speak twice as much as women in advertising. This is work done with the Gina Davis Institute and UN Women's Unstereotype Alliance. So this is part of our cultural framework. This is what's in our hands, on our phones. It's on our screens. You know, I'm 49 tomorrow, and when I was a child, a young girl growing up, and I watched ads, you never saw a woman going to work on an ad. You only saw them in the kitchen. And I can tell you some more about some of the data on that. But for me, it's an opportunity if I'm feeling positive. It's definitely a responsibility, and it's a disgrace when I'm feeling negative that we're not out there and not just representing the wonderful work that women do in the world, both paid and unpaid, but also pushing the agenda through what we show on our screens. So I think there's a massive opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
in
Fantastic, Mitch,
Japleen.
and a happy early birthday from all of us, right?
Thank you. 49. How did that happen? Anyway, so the
Not a day over 25.
no, thank you.
Japleen, Japleen.
Hi everyone. So I think I will just add on to what my previous co-panelists have already mentioned. We see that although media is called the fourth pillar of democracy, but it is heavily dominated by men. And I can definitely speak for India that newsrooms are dominated by male editors, male journalists more than women. And it's not just about having more women in news media or any kind of media, but also the kind of representation that we are doing of women, of gender, and of various gender identities, and people from marginalized genders. Because even now, for example, when we talk about gender-based violence reportage, or when we are reporting rape, the kind of language that mainstream media uses, it's so victim blaming in nature, or you would give unnecessary details about the victim or the survivor. It's absolutely not necessary to mention what she was wearing, or where she was, or what time of the day it was. But we see that these kind of stereotypes lead into our reportage, and media has a huge role to play to form the opinion of the people. So when somebody is reading a headline about a rape reportage, and it has subtle victim blaming tones, that kind of subconscious mentality then goes in the audience as well. And they would be like, oh, so what was she expecting? If she's wearing a short skirt and roaming at 2 a.m. in the night, of course she would get raped. So I feel it's really, really important for not just for more women at leadership positions in news media, but also for better and sensitive reportage. Thank you.
And thank you to you all for capturing, really the essence of our topic today, Japleen. In Nairobi, we are grappling with the same thing: how we cover women's issues, and I think we'll get into detail with Mallika a little later. But let me stay with you for a little bit, Japleen, and tell us very briefly about Feminism in India, which is the platform that you started. It amplifies the voices of women and marginalized communities. Why is that important, would you say, in unraveling gender stereotypes?
Thank you, Anna. So I think I am the person with the least experience here, and I'm really honored to be with such experts on this panel. But as a student, when I was, and I'm someone who neither studied media or journalism, nor gender or feminism. As a student, I was really passionate about these two topics, even though I was doing something completely different. And I used to follow a lot of Western platforms, especially US-based platforms like Bitch Media, MS Magazine, which was started by Gloria Steinem, many other such platforms. And I really was interested in how they would bring a feminist lens to daily issues. And when people talk about feminist media or women's media, it's always about stories about women or on women. And that is
Right.
for sure important that we write about women and women's issues. But I feel people restrict feminist media or women's media to that. And the economy is as much women's issue as let's say domestic violence, or fashion for that matter. So what I wanted to do was have a feminist lens on everything. So when on my platform, we are a bilingual platform. We publish in English and Hindi, which are the two official languages. Many of the two of the many official languages in India. And we don't restrict ourselves to only what are conventionally women's issues, but also talk about the rising petrol prices, for example, or politics. I mean, that's extremely important, and we have some very key elections coming up in India, and it's very important to have women's voices heard during those critical times or protests happening in the country. So for me, the kind of I want to see, it's having that lens on everything and not restricting it to a certain niche.
Yeah. According to a report, and I believe most of you have seen it, a newly released report by the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women, media was reported as the second most common source of gender stereotypes through newspapers, TV programs, radio programs, cartoons, or books. And as a member of the fraternity, it kills me to just say that. Second most common source of gender stereotypes. So if I would just stay with you, Japleen, on this very briefly, perpetuated by media images in many parts of the world, one of the leading barriers for women in business is the stereotype that women are more domestic in nature, for instance, more than business oriented, and therefore they're not usually seen as risk takers or leaders in business or aggressive in business. Would you say that this is true in your part of the world, and how does your organization address such stereotypes?
That is definitely true, the stereotype, not the actual reality. That it's always seen that, even when it comes to media, and I've heard this from, not like I've not just experienced it myself, but heard it from other women media entrepreneurs, is whenever they are talking to, prospective funders or investors, they're like, oh, so you are the editor in chief, who's the CEO? Or who's going to run the actual business, because the assumption is that, sure, she could be a good journalist or a good editor or editor in chief, but she cannot be the CEO. And I'm really happy to bust that myth for them, because I am the CEO of my organization. So
Fantastic.
and we are a business, for profit organization. We are a media company, and we are making business. I'm not saying that I'm making tons of money, but it is a business. At the end of the day, income is being generated, and although we are a very small team of 10 people only, but at the end of the day, I'm able to pay their salaries, and I think that's an achievement in itself. And I would really, like, also ask other women entrepreneurs, and especially media entrepreneurs, to take that challenge head on, because we can only break these stereotypes by example.
Exactly, and that's no mean feat. Media in itself can be quite monstrous, and running a business can be quite difficult. So, hat off to you. 10 people, you're keeping food on your table, you're possibly supporting their families as well. So, the ripple effect goes on and on. Congratulations to you. Mallika, let me draw you in. Because we are both players in this industry very much. And you know as well as I do that men still dominate senior positions in the media across the world. How does a lack of women's leadership in media then correlate to the continued perpetuation of stereotypes against women?
I think it goes back to what Japleen just said. If you don't have female representation at the top levels, it's very difficult to then change the tone of reporting. And when I look at my career, I break it up into two parts. I'm with Bloomberg now, and I work in business news. But for a long time before that, I was with CNN, and I covered general news, and I spent a chunk of that in India. And I was in India when we had the horrific, the Delhi gang rape case, and I know that's what Japleen was referring to. And I understand fully what she says about the tone, and the tone which hints that it's a victim's fault. That is something that we saw so much of that in India. Until today, I mean, the rape cases are just gruesome, and unfortunately, they continue to happen. What's heartening is that they are getting reported now more. There's definitely more of an intentionality about it, and we are seeing it making the news, whereas earlier we didn't. But to go back to your question, I think having more women in leadership positions in newsrooms would perhaps make the tone of the reportage a little bit more sensitive towards women. So I think that when it comes to general news, that's one thing. When I think about business news, yes, I think having more women in senior leadership positions can create change. It can create an environment where you see more women, where you see more women on television, where you see more women being written about.
Right.
I think, that can make a big difference.
And let me just jump right in with a brief question and a briefer response, if you would. It's not by accident that there are few women holding senior media leadership positions. Many women join the media just about childbearing age, if you like, and want to rise through the ranks. There's a lot of pressure in terms of, running their families as well as being career women. And many times in, I think, developing countries, so let me say Kenya, for instance, one would opt to, sort of stay in the family and run the home and not be that aggressive in taking up leadership in the industry. What does media need to do to be able to retain more women, to rise to the top?
Well, actually, Anne, this is not just a problem that's exclusive to the media industry. This is a problem that's across industry. It's the same problem in any industry. You talk to, you look at finance, you look at retail, you look at hospitality, you look at any industry, it's the same thing. You just look at the number of Fortune 500 companies. How many women CEOs do you have there? A fraction.
Right.
The numbers are just appalling. So I think it's a much broader question than that. But I think the issues are the same. You don't have a problem attracting women into the workforce. As they grow into more senior positions, women fall off. It's the whole question of the leaky pipeline. So we have to talk about what society is going to do to support these women. I think it's definitely not a problem that's exclusive to the media industry at all.
Right.
Am I allowed to butt in?
Sure,
we
sure,
did a big listening study called Here to Be Heard. We had over 10,000 women that Mars ran over 88 countries, and on this particular topic that you're talking about, the game changer here is when you stop making it about motherhood and you move it to being about parenthood. And when we can start really changing that conversation, because it's liberating for those people who are fathers, who want to have a different role with their families, because the stereotypes, if you banish the gender stereotypes, it benefits everybody, right?
Yeah.
Now, not every family situation will choose to lean into that, but if the option is there, then suddenly this ceases to be that it's the women that leave, it's the women that will be off, it's the women therefore who are never going to have a serious career, and it starts to be about what do we do with the parents in our organization, how do we encourage them and make sure we retain the great parents. And I think that for me is one of the things that we have heard from women, and we've also heard from the organizations that we work with, has the real opportunity to create change. I don't think we're close to it yet, but that's an opportunity.
Yeah, from motherhood to parenthood. I love it. Brilliant. Let me return to you, Mallika. And in the same report that I've cited earlier while speaking to Japleen, says this: nearly half of women entrepreneurs, 49%, reported that media was a source of gender stereotypes experienced in their childhood. Over a third reported that experiencing gender stereotypes as a child made them feel that they wouldn't be capable of running a business. And I found this interesting because many times we focus, at least in Kenya, for instance, on content for mature audiences, such as news broadcasts or whatever, but we're not too focused on the impact of children's programming and perpetuating stereotypes. So as a podcaster who's previously worked as a correspondent for broadcast news, I believe, do you think different mediums of media and the content that's targeted at different age groups as well have different amounts of work needed to be done relating to combating gender stereotypes? And if possible at all, could you sort of rank it for us? Where does more work need to be done?
I think work needs to be done across all age groups. But yes, I agree with you. I think if we could focus more on the younger generation, kids, teenagers, that, obviously, especially the preteen, teenage, that age group, you're really impressionable. And that's the time you have the big dreams, you have the ambition, and you want to be inspired. Something as simple as, the series, the Rebel Girls series, those books, right, which you open any page and it's a one page and an inspiring woman. How fantastic is that? I didn't have that when I was growing up. And now there are series after series, which I can read to my daughter. So I think targeting that age group is really, really important. And going back to what we were saying earlier, you have to present role models. You have to let girls know that I can achieve this level of success, or I can be an astronaut, or whatever you dream to be. It's really important. So I think I would, if I had to rank it, I would say that age group, the preteen, teen years, when people are really impressionable, go for it. Make an impression. Tell them that they can do anything they want their heart to do.
What about mediums?
Mediums, I think it's equal responsibility, because the medium is your preferred choice. Do you prefer listening to a podcast, or do you prefer reading an old-fashioned newspaper? Also, accessibility. Depending which part of the world you're in, you may not have access to online news every day. You may still be getting your news from a magazine or a newspaper. You may not have access to cable news. So I think it's every platform's responsibility to make sure that they dispel the stereotypes, because you don't know who's consuming news through what platform.
Right. What responsibility do international news organizations like Bloomberg have to ensure best practice when it comes to shaping narratives or avoiding gender stereotypes? And does Bloomberg have any policies in this regard?
Yes, we do. And it's been interesting. One of the policies threw me off when I first joined Bloomberg, and it's as sometimes I get asked to be on panels or to moderate panels like today. And when I get asked to moderate a panel or be on a panel, obviously I have to go back to Bloomberg and get permission. And they'll ask me all these questions. What's the topic? Who's the audience? Is it on the record, off the record? And then a question is there gender diversity? So the first time I went to Bloomberg, and then I looked at the other panelists, and I was like, oh, I was supposed to moderate a panel, and there were 2 men on the panel. And Bloomberg's answer was like, no, then you can't. If there is no gender diversity on a panel, you can't moderate it. So I had to go back and say, I'm really sorry, but I can't do this because you don't have a woman on the panel. Then Bloomberg's response was like, actually, go back and tell them, if you can't find a suitable woman on the panel, we'll help you. We'll find a woman, because are you crazy? Are you telling me you can't find a suitable woman for this panel? So that's one thing that they do. And one thing we do, I work in Bloomberg Live, where we organize events and conferences. We don't put together a panel if it's all dudes. We just don't. So I'm proud of that.
Love it. Absolutely. Mitch, let's talk about the Unstereotype Alliance. I know you've recently done some work on intersectionality in advertising and looking beyond gender. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that study? What are the key findings from this work that can help us understand what advertising stands for in relation to shaping and changing gender stereotypes?
Yes, so the Unstereotype Alliance is it's part of UN Women, and it's an alliance of big organizations, businesses, media buyers all coming together. I think I think it's a really good example of an industry saying we need, it's better if we get together to try and solve this problem. It was all focused on gender, and all the stats that I said earlier, which in themselves were shocking. I still can't get my head around the fact that 2-to-1 ratio of men to women, and that men speak twice as much as women on advertising. And bear in mind that the people who typically make the purchasing decisions actually are women of the kind of products that tend to get advertised. However, that is really looking at cisgendered, white, privileged, middle class, middle-aged women's representation in advertising. Once you get to the next lane, you start to actually, the wonderful thing is we come in all shapes, sizes and colors, sexualities, beliefs, etc. And you go back to the next level. What we found was actually representation, for example, of different ethnicities in advertising isn't bad, but stereotyping is much worse. So, for example, you will get women of color in advertising, but they are even more likely to be shown in the kitchen. They're even less likely to be shown not in an office. Interestingly, they're much more likely to be shown, another stereotype, in sport or in a sporting environment. So more stereotypes starting to perpetuate themselves. And then you have other intersections, like, for example, disability, women who have disabilities who are just completely not represented by the industry. I mean,
Right.
I think 2% of all ads that we audited globally had anyone who had any kind of visible disability, where 25% from the latest data that we've seen of the population live with some form of disability. So, you know, you just, in a way, gender is a Trojan horse into some of the other conversations that we need to have about representation at every single level of society. And what I have found very powerful about the partnership between Mars and the Unstereotype Alliance and the other businesses is measurement. So until you get this kind of data, you know, I'm running around the business going, I think we probably need more women, you know, and everyone's going, oh, Mitch, yeah, okay, lovely. That's a good idea. We'll get onto it. But then suddenly when you go, hold on a second, look at the stats. Look at the stats. Now, who's paying your salary? It's those women in the supermarkets or ordering online or whatever. And look how you're representing them. 5 times more likely to be shown in states of undress in advertising, which I'm sure will come as no surprise, than men. So I find actually measurement, which, you know, I'm a storyteller. I'm not known for my the measurement side of it, but for me, it's been the most liberating part of this journey to really help a whole industry face into the challenge that they have. So that's some headlines for you.
It's incredible, Mitch. You know, it's interesting. I was listening to your stats, and in my head, they weren't making sense because you said women are 5 times more likely to be found undressed in advertising. Is that correct? Yeah, we know in the house, men are 5 times more likely to at least not have their shirt on. You talked about women talking, did you say men talking twice as much? I believe you said.
Yes.
Twice as much in advertising.
That's not the case in my household.
There you go. There, I didn't even, the point makes itself.
But also, just on a serious point about women at work, there's also some really damaging stereotypes when women are shown working. So the only way that the industry, and this is true of the film industry as much as advertising, seem to be able to show women working, and we have the data behind that, is if they're women in positions of power, they are either sexualized, the kind of the sexy boss, or they're demonized, and they're the bitch boss, to excuse the word, but the stereotype. You don't have that when you see men. You have all sorts of different types of male leadership shown, but those are the 2 common tropes you see of women's stereotypes. And of course, again, that means even if you are seeing women in positions of power, and then you look at yourself and you think, well, I don't think I'm either of those things. So I think, Japleen, to your point, you have to subvert the stereotype. You have to put energy, a huge amount of energy that no man has to put in, to go, actually, I'm going to try and subvert any of these stereotypes to be something that you might not expect to see from my leadership style or my entrepreneurial style or whatever it might be. So I know it's just about advertising, but it's almost a microcosm on what's happening out in the world. I'm finding it very interesting listening to different types of media. Actually, there's a lot of commonality.
But that's what actually it does play out, you know, at work. You will hear women bosses being characterized based on either advertising or fiction characters in the workplace, you know, to just further perpetuate that stereotype in real life. So there isn't this boundary between media and real life. It's morphing into the same thing and reinforcing negative stereotypes. Just before I leave you, Mitch, does Mars have a policy, for instance, on best practice guidelines relating to advertising and gender stereotypes that you believe can be adapted globally to advance equality?
Yes. So we have our 10 commitments to gender balanced advertising. So we have some kind of simple, if you like, targets that all of those things, we should be at 50-50, we should be at parity. So 50% representation, 50% share of voice, and also in stereotyping. In fact, we now have a tool where we always ask the question, what if you turn it on its head? And it can be some very simple things like, why is the man driving the car and the woman's in the passenger seat? You know, what if it's the man that's cooking and the woman's kicking a football in the garden? I mean, very mundane situations, but I think that help shape, you know, society and what's expected when you go back home. But very importantly, and I think this, you were talking about newsrooms, which is not a world I inhabit, probably the most significant is the targets that we have on the percentage of female directors who shoot ads, because if you only ever see the world through the eyes of a man, because between 80 to 90% of ads are made by male directors, that means their lens is what you're seeing the experience of the world on. And we actually have targets in our marketing teams and in our agency teams to be gender balanced, and those are shared with the Unstereotype. You can go online, and the Unstereotype Alliance can help organizations with that stuff. So what the output is merely an output, depending on who's behind the camera, who's writing the ad, and the people who are in the business making the decisions around the table. So I hope that answers the question.
It certainly does. The following questions I'd like to pose to the entire panel, but Japleen, if you would kick us off. On the back of the COVID-19 pandemic, are there specific media trends that we should engage or be watching to help us build back better in as far as gender equality is concerned?
Thank you, Anna. So I think when I speak for India, this is a trend that actually, was also a global trend, that along the pandemic, we saw a shadow pandemic, which was women facing domestic violence, because everybody was at home. And this was reported in the Indian media well. However, I would say that there still needs a lot of sensitivity when it comes to reporting violence against women and gender-based violence. Apart from this, there were also a lot of other issues, and especially, in the Indian context, the government thinks about women's health towards the end. So there was a shortage of menstrual hygiene products, and also shortage of sexual health services of women needing an abortion and needing other kind of sexual health services. And this was something that wasn't very, I would say, deeply reported. The domestic violence was definitely reported because it was literally all over the place, and also the National Commission of Women also tweeted about it. So it then kind of got viral, and then everybody started jumping on it. But there were a lot of other issues that weren't reported, and specifically because COVID-19 also kind of dominated all health related news. So any kind of other health requirements or needs, and especially women's health. And in India, even though abortion is legal under certain circumstances, still there is a lot of stigma when it comes to especially unmarried and single women getting an abortion. So I felt like there could have been better and more reportage on how women's reproductive and menstrual and sexual needs were not taken care of by the government, and even they completely forgot that this is also this is an essential product. So when they released a list of essential products in the beginning, when they announced the lockdown, they forgot to add pads and tampons to it, and they forgot to add sexual health services as an essential service, and they only did that later. And we also saw that there was a baby boom, during the pandemic in India. India has reported a baby boom. So you can, make out from all of these statistics that because there was so much domestic violence, and just to give some more context, India does not recognize marital rape as a crime. So I am just putting things out there for you, and you can do the math that there was domestic violence, marital rape is not recognized, and abortion services were not available, and there's a baby boom. So
I hear you. And anyone else want to contribute? On the back of the COVID-19 pandemic, what trends should we watch? How can we build back better in relation to, ending gender stereotypes?
I think one thing did you want to go? I think one thing I'm starting to see is things that are considered a woman's issue are now no longer being considered exclusively a woman's issue. And it goes back to the point Mitch made earlier about motherhood versus parenthood. And what I mean by that is, issues around childcare. Typically, they were always seen as the mom's issue, the working mom's issue, a woman's issue. Working from home, it was something that, again, fell on the woman more. Her, did she have to work from home? Did she have to ask for flexible working? Did she have to go down to a 3-day week? The onus was really on the working mom very often. And with the pandemic, what happened is we had the world's largest work from home experiment. And, there has been a shift in the way we work, and it's been a global shift. And I think many companies now are realizing it's okay to have people work from home. And suddenly childcare is also a dad's issue. More men are working from home. And I think, and I'm hoping, if there's, I think what would be a pity is if we build back from the pandemic and nothing changes. I think that would be a real lost opportunity. And I'm hoping as we build back in a way that childcare is equally a man and a woman's responsibility. Working from home loses its stigma, and it loses its stigma for both men and for women. On the flip side, I think what we are starting to see in very early data is that more women are now entering the workforce because companies are allowing them to work flexible hours or to work from home. And if that is one of the outcomes of the pandemic, then that's an unexpected gift.
Mitch?
Yes, to build on the sort of the working piece for a minute, one of the things that we are very mindful of at Mars is, whilst there's huge benefits to more flexible working, more hybrid working, I personally work very flexibly. We're also slightly concerned that what will happen is the women will stay at home and be unloading the dishwasher whilst they're on their conference call, as I do. The men will go into the office, and then when the opportunities present themselves for the person who's going to do the presentation, who's going to do this, the men are the people who are there and visible, and the women are not so visible, and that it could. So I don't think we just have to be very mindful about that, and we have to make this not a gendered. Let's not make hybrid working and flexible working gendered. Let's make it open to all and encourage everyone to take it. In terms of representation, sadly, some work done by the Unstereotype Alliance showed that during COVID we went backwards. So what we saw, less content was produced generally, which won't be any surprise, but what we saw was actually a kind of slipping back into the comfortable slippers of the old stereotypes in the content that was produced. So there was one very, I'm based in the UK, and there was one very famous example where the UK government did an ad to encourage people to stay at home, and it showed 4 scenarios: someone ironing, someone cooking, someone reading to a child, and someone sitting on a sofa watching the TV. And I can let you guess which 3 were women and which one was a man in their scenarios. And they pulled the ad in the end. But actually, we need to now accelerate out of the pandemic with a refreshed sense of ambition, I think, on stereotyping the content that we produce, because I think it's just partly a laziness or a going back to old habits is what kind of happened.
I want to stick with content because it's becoming quite an issue. Mallika, I'll return to you. A question from the audience here. Yeah, you spoke about the importance of content aimed at girls and young women or young people. What about representing young people's voices in media content more broadly? Is there more work to do there? A lack of gender representation intersecting with age too, so that we can hear young voices in all contexts?
I think, of course, it would be great to hear from young people. It is tricky, though. It is challenging, though. I mean, how do you do that, right? And this is something where I would love to hear from Japleen and Mitch also. Like, I'm just thinking in the newsroom where we're covering business news, how do we make sure young people's voices are heard? We are covering, big companies, we're covering interest rates, we're covering GDP numbers. So in the world of business news, I think it is trickier to have young voices represented. But yes, we should be finding ways to engage with them more, take their questions more, interact with them more. But again, I think that is changing, because one thing that's changing it and leveling things out when it comes to age is social media. We didn't have that again when I was when I was little, or in my time. I'm aging myself big time here, but I think people can do that, and young people can do that. Really use their voice through social media. And I think they have started to. If you're looking at companies these days, and a lot of companies keep talking about purpose, they talk about sustainability, they talk about leading with being a purpose led company. Who's driving that? A lot of them will tell you it is the young consumer today. It's the youthful consumer, because they are the ones demanding change. They want to know, if I'm buying my shoes from a particular company, I hope those shoes are being ethically made. So the young consumers do have a voice, and they are using it via social media, and I think that's great.
All right. Japleen, did you want to contribute to that? How to bring in young people across media content?
Yeah, thanks. And Mallika, I completely understand. I don't understand business news at all, but I understand where you're coming from, and I think your own solution of having young people is great, because today, as you correctly said, people are using WhatsApp and Instagram to run businesses,
Yes.
without a website or without a very specific target audience, because social media has given them these tools, and especially with WhatsApp Business, the new app that WhatsApp launched a couple of years back, I think. It's actually very easy to, to just put a catalog on your WhatsApp number itself, and you already have your friends and family's contacts. So it makes it really easy for small businesses, and I think, although I do understand that, for publication as big as Bloomberg, your focus would be on big companies, but I think there could be feature pieces or something, on how young people today are using social media to earn, to make money, because we also see that a lot of people have actually started, as you also previously said, work from home has come as a very surprise gift for a lot of women, because they are able to, I know this is not correct for me as a feminist to say this, but we have to, contextualize our work in the realities that they are able to manage household and work. We would ideally like that everybody shares responsibility, but we know that especially in India, that's a very far reality. So we have to work with whatever we have. And just one last point is, I feel it's not just young people who are now using social media. I also feel, and again, from an Indian context, larger businesses are recognizing that they cannot ignore this demographic. And given that India is a country where more than, I think, 60%, or basically majority of our population is young people under 35.
Yeah.
So there is absolutely no way that you can ignore that demographic, right? And
Right.
large companies, big businesses identify that, and sustainability now is a trend. Like, everybody's talking about that, and I mean, that's a whole different conversation. But we know that they are capturing these young people on social media because they know they're possible customers, and have that purchasing power.
Right.
Right.
Thank you for that. I want to continue with that idea, and I hope Mallika would be right to say that, in the context of something like business news, often it's much about also experience, and therefore young people may not necessarily be, sort of these business moguls or authorities, and that is why it would be difficult to get them to perhaps comment on business issues at the scale or platform of Bloomberg. And if that is true, then there are, of course, reinforced barriers for women in the nature and content of media, such as those that emphasize the domestic role that we've talked about, as opposed to leadership in business roles in the news. Then you can imagine that much more for a young woman in business, right? So they will not be seen as experts in certain fields. What can media players do to remove that stereotype, which is still a play on what we've been discussing? How can we remove that stereotype and plug in a thought process that kind of pays attention to that um, a stereotype in content creation and in gatekeeping procedures. Mallika and Mitch, I'd love to you both to chime in.
That's a difficult question. I tell you what I'm thinking, and I'm not sure. I definitely don't have the right answer. I'm thinking that what isn't right is to expect the same from one group as you get from the other. So what you might get from a very experienced 49-year-old might be very different from what you get from a less experienced, but possibly having more positive, optimistic, more energetic 29-year-old. I don't know what the right descriptions are, and I think it's the diversity of those voices that you want to hear. So what came to mind is so I'm vice chair of Stonewall. We deliberately have a very diverse board of trustees. So most trustee boards are often quite sort of typically semi-retired white men, to be honest, in the UK. As you would expect from an organisation like Stonewall, we have a very diverse board, but we also have very deliberately brought in younger members to the board, and it's brilliant. I can't tell you the energy it gives me, the insight that it gives all of us, because but their voice is different, and it's different. It's better in some places and not as useful in other places. Just like my voice is great in some places and frankly pointless in other places. So I think for me, it's about the diversity of voices and valuing what everyone can bring, which isn't going to be the same. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And just to add to that, Mitch talked about diversity of voices, and at Bloomberg we have a very interesting program called New Voices, and it's because business news. Trust me, when you're trying to get executives on your air, you can imagine what the proportion is, right, about men to women. And very often we'd go to banks or big companies and say, can't you offer a senior woman executive instead? And they'd be like, well, we have so and so, but she's not quite ready. She's not quite ready for TV exposure. She's not ready. And Bloomberg said again, like, okay, if she's not ready, I'll tell you what, send her to us. We'll train her. We'll make her ready, right?
Oh, wow.
And the program grew and grew and grew, and the program now runs across several countries and cities around the world. And Bloomberg brings in a number of women executives who need a little bit of that training about how to make media appearances. So the next time we go back to the company and say, can't offer a senior woman executive to be on our air, they can't turn around and say she's not ready. And to Mitch's point, what this does is it brings in new voices. And that's what we want. We want new voices. New voices bring in new ideas, new solutions. But very importantly, it's the change we want to see. If we're bringing in these women, you're putting more women on the air, everybody else around them is watching, you're seeing more women. And that's huge. Just the optics of seeing more women on the air, it goes a long way.
Absolutely. But Mallika, I think one of the things I'm really loving about what you say of Bloomberg is this sort of proactive kind of way of responding to the issues, which I think a lot of media could learn from. We tend to be a bit of a behemoth, and we've always done things like this, and not have editorial policy that is responding to the needs of our generation. And I think it's incredible that media must learn then to be dynamic and to be at the forefront of championing unstereotyping women. And I don't know why. Perhaps Japleen, you would tell us if you have any thoughts, because media in itself is at the cutting edge of technology. It's revolutionary with all these different apps and whatnot, and I'm just left behind on all of them. But we seem to be doing very well. I am. Please don't laugh, Mallika. It's true.
You have a huge following on social media. Look at you.
It's a wonder I'm on this platform at all today. No, but seriously, we tend to be so good at tech, but perhaps not too good with people. What can we do to respond to people better, to adapt faster, to get with the program?
And I honestly don't think it's a media industry problem. Like I think Mallika also said this previously. It's just like a humanity problem, because it's across industries first of all, and I think it has more to do with like men like to have their that old men's club together, and you know when women reach that same position, or it basically threatens their authority, and that little club that they've created for themselves. So I think it's a question of authority, and also I don't want to generalize, but I also feel that a lot of men do not like outspoken women, and I think all of us here, I'm sorry, I'm speaking on all of your behalf, but I'm sure that you have experienced it. That there have been instances where outspoken women are not given a promotion, for example, because it's like, oh, she's too bossy, but that same skill would be seen as a leadership skill in men. But when it's women who are outspoken, it's like, oh, she's too bitchy, or she's too bossy, and not the type that we would like, because she'll create conflict, and we will not have a friendly environment. So I feel it's these issues more which restrict women's leadership journey, because as again, I'm just going back to my co-panelist, Mallika mentioned that there is a leaky pipeline. So it's not like so I'll just give you an example of another industry. So India has more women in STEM at the student and university level than men actually. But when it comes to workforce, you don't see the same number. So if women are graduating from engineering and STEM colleges and universities, where exactly are they going? Because you see that there are more there, but you don't see them in workforce, or you don't see them in leadership positions. You see them in junior positions. So it's a industry wide problem, and it has more to do with attitudes and mentality than actually. I don't think it's a media sector problem in itself.
And just for the benefit, I beg your pardon, of the benefit of our audience, I know we've had the B word drop a couple of times in this panel. We certainly don't mean it, as a profanity, but as a reality of what women are actually termed and how they're viewed. And I hope that you are not offended by that. It's just literally the name that is used to refer to women in power positions. Another question from the audience, and perhaps Mitch, you could help us start off with this one. It says, it's brilliant that there are many women working internally to change things in the media. What specific actions can male members of the media do to tackle gender stereotypes, particularly around women and business ownership?
Oh, I'm really passionate about this. So in this survey we did at Mars Here to Be Heard, what cut across all of the specific things that women said they needed to reach their full potential was 70% of all of those 10,000 answers that we got mentioned men. In terms of what needs to change for women to reach their full potential. And some mention them as a problem, just what the data said, and some mention them as the opportunity, and that is the reality, I think. And so I think there is a huge amount that our male allies can do to help us. Feminists are not just women, feminists are men as well, and they can it is exhausting, and people who have lived experience of this more so than I do tell me so much how exhausting it is to fight on behalf of the intersection that you or the intersections that you represent, because you're living that experience of discrimination, you're living that experience of trying to put more effort to break those stereotypes, and at the same time you're expected to fight on behalf of everybody else who's like you. And what men can do for women is they can come in and they can be the voice in the room going, well, why don't we put a woman reporter on this? I don't know anything about the newsroom, so I'm imagining from the telly I've watched, why don't we put a female reporter? Why don't we go and find a female business owner to interview on this business section? Because if it's always the woman that says that in the meeting,
Correct.
I don't know about you. I feel like them thinking, oh God, Mitch is banging on about women again. But if a guy says that in the room, I can't tell you how wonderful that feels. So voice it, help us by voicing it. Be the voice in the room that brings it to attention. I think the other thing, I'm, as I already mentioned, I'm slightly obsessed by this shift from it being about motherhood in the workplace to being about parenting in the workplace. You know, role model.
Yeah.
I had a colleague when I was on the board in the UK, and every board meeting he would say at the beginning of the meeting, we'd do that check-in. Has anyone got anything they need to say? And he'd say, I have to leave at 5 o'clock because today I pick the kids up. It's the simplest thing. It was the simplest thing. But again, so liberating. I was the only woman sat in that boardroom to hear my colleague be the person who say I have to pick the kids up. Because suddenly when I say something like I've got to take this phone call, it's my son's school, and I have to step out of the meeting, it's not the woman in the room. So
Yes.
I think role modeling is also really, really helpful. And then my last thing, and Mallika, sounds a bit like what Bloomberg do, and I think Mars, we are getting increasingly good at this, is give women a platform. So if you're the man who's always asked to do the thing, the big presentation, the interview,
Yeah.
go, hold on a second, maybe you'd like to speak to my brackets female colleague, maybe, etc. So I think that's just a few examples, but male allyship, we will not be successful in this endeavor without our wonderful male allies.
Mallika, do you want to, for 1 minute, chime in on that as well? What can men do?
What can men do? Exactly what Mitch said. They can be our allies. It does help when you have a man in the room who says, yes, let her take the lead on this project. That's very important. I also think men can be intentional about hiring. I think that's very important.
Right.
When you're bringing in, interviewing two candidates, you know what? If they both have exactly the same credentials and qualifications, if one is a guy and one is a girl, this is the time to hire a girl, because you have to level up. The playing field has been uneven for so long. Be intentional about hiring. I think that's something that male bosses can do, because at the moment there are more male bosses than there are female bosses.
All right, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, there you are, and 3 panelists. So your work is cut out for you. A final question to you all. What are your key takeaways in terms of priority areas for action or opportunities to change harmful gender stereotypes in media? And if any of you has a pledge that you'd like to make, please do add that in your final comments. We'll start with you, Japleen.
Thank you, Anna. So I think I'm just gonna take on from what Mallika said about affirmative action hiring. That is something that we actually do at our organization, and we don't just restrict it to gender, but we go beyond gender, and we do it. I mean, we see it on the cases of intersections of caste, sexual orientation, disability, etc., etc. And I think it's a great suggestion that if you have two candidates from the same field, hire the one that will not have the same opportunities as the other. And that would be my suggestion or takeaway from this, this thing. And I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much.
All right, a quick pledge, 30 seconds.
I've been very inspired about the conversation about younger voices. And to that end, I've been very inspired by Japleen. I'm going to go and find out more about your organization and what you do. How incredible.
Thank you.
Mallika.
A quick pledge from me. I won't use the B word here, but for any woman who is loud and aggressive and wants to make her voice heard, I've heard them be called difficult women very often. And my pledge is to continue to highlight the wonderful work difficult women do, so that more young girls can say, I want to grow up to be a difficult woman.
A woman after my own heart. I couldn't have better. I love it. Japleen, we didn't get a pledge from you. What could you pledge in just 1 minute? We have about a minute.
Okay, I think I would like to pledge to mentor more women entrepreneurs, especially who are coming in the media sector, because I think I can really, share my learnings and experience with them.
Fantastic. I think we got your pledge, Mitch. You're going to be following up on what Japleen is doing and looking how to implement something similar. I want to thank you all. It's been such a pleasure. I can't believe an hour is already up. My very special thanks to Mallika, Kapur, to Japleen, Pasricha, and Michele, Mitch, Oliver. Thank you all also for joining us for this session. My name is Anne Kiguta. It's goodbye from me from Nairobi. Mallika, Kapur, over back to you.